What if your addiction was never a mistake, but a message meant only for you? What if it was not something you chose, but something that chose you? Carl Jung warned that the most dangerous battles do not happen in the outside world, but inside the soul, where no one else can see. From this perspective, addiction is not weakness, and it is not a lack of discipline. It is the final stage of an inner confrontation that most people never reach. Every urge, every relapse, every moment you feel pulled back is not random. It is a sign that something unseen is trying to take control through your unconscious. Jung called this force the shadow, the part of you that carries everything denied, repressed, and feared. When ignored, it does not disappear. It becomes stronger and more invasive. This video is not about quitting habits. It is about recognizing the real enemy. Because the moment you see what is truly happening, addiction stops being a curse and becomes a doorway to transformation. The only question is whether you are ready to face what lives inside you. There is a part of you that knows exactly why you reach for that substance, that behavior, that escape. You know the feeling that comes right before the urge hits. It starts as a whisper in your chest, a tightness in your throat, a heaviness that settles over your shoulders like a familiar coat. You tell yourself this time will be different, but deep down, you already know what happens next. This is not about willpower failing you. This is about something far older and far more deliberate taking over the wheel while you watch from the back seat of your own life. Jung spent decades studying the human psyche and discovered that every person carries within them a hidden self, a collection of traits, desires, and truths that were deemed unacceptable by family, society, or even by your own conscious mind. These rejected parts do not vanish simply because you stopped acknowledging them. They sink into the unconscious, where they gather strength in the darkness. They wait. And when the conditions are right, when your defenses are down, or when life becomes too overwhelming, they emerge not as thoughts you can control, but as compulsions that control you. The mechanism is simple, but devastating. Every time you denied your anger, your pain, your needs, or your truth, you fed this hidden self. Every time someone told you to be quiet, to be good, to fit in, to stop feeling what you were feeling, another piece of your authentic self got locked away. The shadow grew larger with each denial. It became a reservoir of unlived life, of unexpressed emotion, of suppressed rage and unmet longing. And because you never gave these feelings a conscious outlet, they found their own way out through the back door of your psyche. This is why addiction feels like it has its own agenda, because in a very real sense, it does. The shadow does not care about your goals, your health, or your future. It cares only about expression, about finally being seen and felt after years of being buried alive. The substance or behavior you turn to is never really the point. It is just the vehicle the shadow uses to force its way into your awareness. When you drink, use, binge, or obsess, you are not making a choice in that moment. You are being moved by an inner force that was created by a lifetime of self-abandonment. Most people spend their entire lives trying to manage symptoms without ever looking at the source. They switch addictions, they white-knuckle through sobriety, they promise themselves and others that this time they mean it. But the shadow remains untouched, unfed, and furious. It will always find another way in because its job is not to destroy you, even though it feels that way. Its job is to make you finally pay attention to what you have been running from since childhood. The tragedy is that the very thing you are addicted to once served as protection. It numbed the pain when the pain was too much. It gave you relief when relief was nowhere else to be found. It kept you functional when falling apart was not an option. Your addiction was your solution before it became your problem. And the shadow knows this. It remembers when you first discovered that escape hatch, and it will keep pulling you back there because, from its perspective, that is where safety lives. That is where survival lives. The fact that it is now killing you does not register in the shadow's logic because the shadow exists outside of time. It is still responding to wounds from 10, 20, 30 years ago as if they are happening right now. Understanding this changes everything because it means you are not fighting a disease or a habit. You are fighting a part of yourself that is trying desperately to communicate something you have refused to hear. The more you resist, the louder it gets. The more you shame yourself for relapsing, the stronger the shadow becomes, because shame is its native language. Shame is what created it in the first place. Every time you look in the mirror with disgust, every time you promise to do better and then fail again, you are actually feeding the very force you think you are fighting. This is the trap. You cannot defeat the shadow by rejecting it, because rejection is what gave it power to begin with. You cannot outrun it because it lives inside you. You cannot reason with it because it speaks in symbols and sensations, not words. The only way forward is to turn around and look directly at what you have been avoiding. Not the addiction itself, but the wound beneath it. Not the behavior, but the unmet need driving the behavior. Not the substance, but the silence you were trying to fill. If you pay close enough attention, you will notice that your relapses follow a pattern so precise it feels almost scripted. It is never truly random. There is always a specific emotional state, a particular type of stress, or a certain kind of emptiness that precedes the fall. Maybe it happens when you feel abandoned. Maybe it happens when you succeed at something and the pressure to maintain that success becomes unbearable. Maybe it happens in moments of quiet, when there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. Whatever the trigger, it is always the same trigger, wearing different masks. Jung understood that the unconscious mind operates in cycles and patterns. It does not learn the way the conscious mind does. It repeats. It returns to the same unresolved conflicts over and over, creating situations that echo the original wound. This is why therapy can feel like peeling an infinite onion. You think you have dealt with the issue, you think you have moved past it, and then 6 months later, you're right back in the same emotional state, facing the same urge, making the same choice you swore you would never make again. The reason for this repetition is not weakness or lack of growth. It is that the unconscious is trying to bring something to completion. There is an unfinished story inside you, and the shadow will keep replaying it until you finally understand what it is trying to show you. Every relapse is not a failure. It is another attempt by your psyche to get your attention. It is saying, look here, feel this, stop running. This is where the work needs to happen. Think about the moment right before you relapse. Not the act itself, but the emotional landscape that precedes it. There is usually a feeling of being utterly alone, even if you are surrounded by people. There is a sense that no one truly sees you, that you are performing your life rather than living it. There is exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness. It is a soul exhaustion. A weariness that comes from constantly holding yourself together, from always being strong, from never allowing yourself to fall apart in a way that feels safe and witnessed. In that moment, the addiction offers something your conscious life cannot. It offers permission to stop trying. It offers a brief escape from the impossible standards you or others have placed on you. It offers a kind of death without dying. A way to disappear without actually leaving, and for a few hours or a few minutes you get relief. Not happiness, not joy, but relief. The difference is crucial because relief is what you are actually chasing, not pleasure. You are not seeking to feel good. You are seeking to stop feeling bad. But here is what makes the pattern so insidious. The relief is always temporary, and the return is always brutal. You wake up or come down or sober up, and the original pain is still there, now accompanied by shame, regret, and the crushing weight of having failed yourself again. This adds another layer to the wound. Now you are not just dealing with the original abandonment or trauma or emptiness. You are also dealing with the evidence of your own powerlessness, and that evidence feeds the shadow even more. The shadow thrives on this cycle because every relapse proves its central belief about you, which is that you are broken, unworthy, and incapable of change. This belief was likely planted in childhood by caregivers who could not meet your emotional needs, by environments that required you to deny your feelings in order to survive, or by experiences that taught you that your authentic self was too much, too sensitive, too intense, too anything. The shadow carries this belief like a sacred text, and every time you relapse, it gets to say, "See, I told you. This is who you really are." Breaking this pattern requires something most people are terrified to do. It requires you to stay present in the moment when the urge hits, instead of immediately acting on it or trying to suppress it. It requires you to feel the feeling underneath the craving without judgment or resistance. This sounds simple, but it is among the hardest things a human being can do, because that feeling is usually unbearable. It is the feeling you have spent your entire life trying not to feel. It is loneliness so profound it feels like annihilation. It is shame so deep it feels like proof that you should not exist. It is grief so heavy it feels like it will crush you if you let it in. But here is the truth Jung discovered. That feeling will not kill you. Avoiding it might. Every time you choose the addiction over the feeling, you reinforce the pattern. Every time you numb instead of feel, you teach your psyche that the only way to survive emotion is to escape it. And so the cycle continues, not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to keep surviving in the only way you know how. The question is whether you are ready to discover a different kind of strength. If this resonates with you, and you feel ready to stop escaping and start integrating what lives inside you, there is a next step. I created the SIM Method ebook for those who want to work with their shadows instead of fighting them. It is a simple, focused guide designed to help you build a different kind of strength in just 5 minutes a day. You can find it through the link in the first pinned comment. Somewhere along the way, without realizing it, you made an agreement. Not with another person, but with a force inside yourself. The terms were never spoken out loud, but they were understood perfectly by your unconscious mind. The contract went something like this: I will give up parts of myself in exchange for safety, acceptance, or survival. I will become smaller so others can be comfortable. I will hide my needs so I do not burden anyone. I will pretend everything is fine even when I am drowning, and in return, I will be allowed to exist. This contract was not signed in a moment of weakness. It was signed in a moment of necessity. Maybe you were 5 years old and learned that expressing sadness made your parents uncomfortable, so you swallowed it down and put on a smile. Maybe you were 12 and realized that being vulnerable got you bullied, so you built walls and never let anyone in. Maybe you were 20 and discovered that asking for help was seen as failure, so you learned to carry everything alone. These were survival strategies and they worked. They kept you functional, they kept you moving forward. But they came with a cost that you are only now beginning to understand. The cost was your connection to yourself. Every time you honored the contract, every time you chose approval over authenticity, you sent a message to your own soul that it was not safe to be real. Your true feelings, your real desires, your actual needs, all of these became threats to the fragile peace you had constructed. So you learned to ignore them. You became an expert at not knowing what you want, at not feeling what you feel, at not needing what you need. And for a while, this worked beautifully. You were praised for being low maintenance, for being strong, for being easy to deal with. You became the person everyone could count on because you never asked for anything in return. But the shadow does not forget. It keeps a record of every denied emotion, every suppressed need, every moment you betrayed yourself to keep the peace with others. and it does not accept the terms of your contract because it was never consulted when you made it. The shadow represents the part of you that refuses to disappear no matter how hard you try to erase it. It holds everything you disowned, and it will use any means necessary to remind you that those disowned parts still exist and still demand recognition. This is where addiction enters as the enforcer of a counter-contract. When the conscious contract says, be small, be quiet, be good, the addiction says, no, I will take up space, I will be loud, I will demand attention. When the conscious contract says, you do not deserve rest or pleasure or relief, the addiction says, I will give you all three right now, consequences be damned. In this way, addiction is not the enemy of your conscious contracts. It is the rebellion against them. It is the part of you that refuses to keep living under terms that require your soul to suffocate. Jung called this the enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually becomes its opposite when taken to an extreme. If you push yourself too hard toward control, discipline, and self-denial, the psyche will eventually swing in the opposite direction toward chaos, impulsivity, and self-destruction. This is not a moral failing. It is a psychological law as reliable as gravity. The tighter you grip, the more violently you will eventually let go. The more you repress, the more explosive the return of the repressed will be. Most people experience this swing and interpret it as proof of their brokenness. They think the addiction reveals their true nature as weak or damaged. But Jung would say the opposite is true. The addiction reveals that your true nature is still alive underneath all the contracts and compromises. It reveals that some part of you is still fighting for authenticity, even if it is fighting in the most destructive way possible. The addiction is not the disease. The original contract is the disease. The addiction is just the symptom, the alarm bell, the soul's last desperate attempt to renegotiate terms that were killing you slowly. Understanding this means you can stop waging war against yourself. You can stop seeing the addiction as an invader and start seeing it as a messenger. What is it trying to tell you about the life you are living? What needs are going unmet? What feelings are you still not allowed to have? What parts of yourself are you still pretending do not exist? These are not comfortable questions, and the answers will likely require you to make changes that feel impossible or terrifying. You might have to set boundaries that disappoint people. You might have to admit you are not okay when everyone expects you to be fine. You might have to choose yourself in ways that feel selfish because you have spent so long choosing everyone else. But here is what happens when you start renegotiating the contract. The shadow loses its power not because you defeat it, but because you stop giving it reasons to rebel. When you allow yourself to feel without judgment, when you honor your needs without shame, when you speak your truth even when your voice shakes, the pressure inside you begins to release. The addiction loses its purpose because it no longer needs to be the only outlet for your denied self. You create space for that denied self to exist in healthier ways, in conscious ways, in ways that do not destroy you in the process of trying to save you. This does not happen overnight. The original contract was written over years or decades, and rewriting it takes time and immense courage. But every small act of self-honoring weakens the old agreement. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, every time you feel instead of numb, every time you say no when you mean no, and yes when you mean yes, you are signing a new contract, one that allows you to exist, not in spite of who you are, but because of who you are. And that is when the addiction begins to lose its grip, not through force, but through obsolescence. There comes a point where the struggle is no longer just in your mind. It moves into your flesh, into your cells, into the very rhythm of your breathing. Your body starts keeping score in ways your conscious mind cannot ignore. You wake up tired no matter how much you sleep. Your heart races for no reason. Your stomach churns with anxiety that has no clear source. You feel old in a way that has nothing to do with age, and everything to do with carrying a weight that was never meant to be carried alone. Jung recognized that the psyche and soma are not separate entities, but two expressions of the same underlying reality. What happens in your unconscious does not stay there. It migrates into your physical form, creating symptoms that doctors often cannot explain because they are looking for biological causes when the root is psychological or spiritual. This is not to say the pain is not real. It is profoundly real, but its origin is not a virus or a malfunction. Its origin is a soul in crisis, trying to communicate through the only language it has left, which is the language of the body. When you spend years ignoring your emotional truth, your body becomes the messenger. It will force you to pay attention through exhaustion, through illness, through pain that stops you in your tracks. The addiction accelerates this process because it adds a second layer of assault. Not only are you carrying the original wounds that drove you to the substance or behavior, but now you are also dealing with the physical consequences of the addiction itself. Your liver struggles, your brain chemistry shifts, your nervous system stays locked in fight or flight mode even when there is no immediate danger. You become a walking battleground where multiple wars are being waged simultaneously. This is why quitting the substance alone is rarely enough. You can be clean for months or years and still feel like you are dying inside because the original wound remains untouched. Your body remembers everything your mind tried to forget. It remembers the moments you were hurt and had to pretend you were fine. It remembers the times you needed comfort and received criticism instead. It remembers every instance of emotional abandonment, every betrayal, every loss that you were not allowed to grieve. All of this lives in your tissues, in your muscles, in the tension you carry in your shoulders and jaw and gut. The addiction gave your body permission to finally express what it had been holding. When you were high or drunk or lost in the behavior, your defenses came down. Emotions you had locked away for years could finally surface, even if they surfaced in distorted and destructive ways. Rage could be felt, grief could be touched. Vulnerability could exist for a brief moment before the armor went back up. This is why the substance or behavior feels like relief, even as it destroys you. It is the only time your body gets to tell the truth. But the truth told through addiction is a truth without integration. It erupts and then disappears, leaving wreckage in its wake, but no real resolution. The emotions come up, but they do not get processed. The pain gets felt, but it does not get healed. You are stuck in a loop where your body keeps screaming the same message and you keep responding in the same insufficient way. The only path out is to learn a different way of letting your body speak, a way that does not require destroying yourself in the process. This requires you to befriend your body again, which is perhaps the hardest part of recovery because your body likely feels like a betrayer. It craves what is killing you. It shakes and sweats and aches when you try to stop. It does not seem to be on your side, but the body is not betraying you. It is trying to survive using the only coping mechanism it knows. It is stuck in an old pattern, responding to present moments as if they were past traumas, flooding you with the same chemicals and sensations that once helped you endure the unendurable. Healing this split between mind and body is not about discipline or control. It is about developing what Jung called somatic awareness, the ability to feel what is happening in your body without immediately needing to change it or escape from it. This means sitting with discomfort when every instinct tells you to run. It means noticing the tightness in your chest and breathing into it instead of reaching for the thing that makes it go away. It means allowing your body to shake, to cry, to release the stored trauma in whatever form it needs to take. For many people, this is terrifying because it feels like losing control. But you are not losing control. You are finally stopping the exhausting work of maintaining false control. You are letting your body do what it has been trying to do for years, which is discharge the pain that has nowhere else to go. When you create space for this, when you allow the sensations to move through you without resistance or judgment, something shifts. The body begins to trust you again. It stops needing to scream because you are finally listening. This process is not linear, and it is not quick. There will be days when your body feels like a prison, and the urge to escape through addiction feels like the only rational choice. But each time you choose to stay present instead of checking out, each time you meet your physical discomfort with compassion instead of contempt, you are rewriting the relationship between your conscious self and the soma that carries you through this world. You are teaching your body that it is safe to feel, safe to release, safe to heal. And when your body finally believes this, when it no longer needs addiction as a pressure valve, that is when true freedom begins to feel possible. There is a reason why recovery feels impossible even when you want it desperately. There is a reason why every attempt to quit feels like swimming against a current so strong it might drown you. The addiction does not want you to discover the one thing that would end its power over you. And that one thing is simple but devastating. You are not fighting to get rid of something. You are fighting to finally become someone. The greatest lie addiction tells is that it is a foreign invader, something external that entered your life and took over. This lie is comforting because it means the real you is still intact somewhere underneath, just waiting to be uncovered. But Jung understood that this is not how the psyche works. The addiction is not separate from you. It is a part of you that developed in response to conditions that made your authentic self unacceptable or unsafe. It is a fragment of your personality that split off and took on a life of its own, because the whole of you could not be allowed to exist. This means that getting rid of the addiction is not like removing a tumor. It is more like integrating an exiled part of yourself back into the whole. That exiled part contains not just destructive urges, but also vital energy, creativity, and aspects of your personality that were deemed too much, or too intense, or too real. When you try to simply eliminate the addiction without understanding what it carries, you are essentially trying to kill a part of yourself. And the psyche will fight this with everything it has, because its primary drive is toward wholeness, not perfection. What the addiction does not want you to know is that beneath the compulsion lies a disowned gift. The same intensity that drives you toward the substance or behavior could be channeled into passion, creation, or purpose. The same sensitivity that makes you need to numb could be the source of profound empathy and insight. The same refusal to conform that led you into addiction could be the rebellious spirit that allows you to live authentically in a world that demands conformity. These qualities were never the problem. The problem was that you were taught they were unacceptable, so you had no choice but to express them in distorted ways. Jung spent his life studying individuals who suffered from what he called a neurosis, which he defined as the suffering of a soul that has not found its meaning. He observed that many people with addictions were not lacking in character or willpower. They were lacking a sense of purpose that felt worthy of their life force. They were people with immense energy and potential who had nowhere to direct it, no vision large enough to contain them, no work or calling that could match the intensity of their inner fire. And so that fire turned inward and became destructive because it had nowhere else to go. This is why simply removing the addiction leaves a void that feels unbearable. You are not just losing a habit, you are losing the one thing that made you feel alive, even if it was killing you. You are losing the structure that gave your days meaning, even if that meaning was the meaning of survival. You are losing an identity, even if that identity was built around suffering. The question is not how to empty yourself of the addiction. The question is what you will fill that space with once it is gone. Most people never ask this question because they assume that life without addiction will automatically be better, but Jung warned that nature abhors a vacuum. If you remove the addiction without replacing it with something equally compelling, the psyche will simply create a new addiction or fall back into the old one. This is why so many people who get sober find themselves trapped in other compulsions: workaholism, codependency, exercise obsession, perfectionism. They traded one prison for another because they never addressed the underlying need for the prison itself. The need is this: you need something bigger than yourself to devote your life to. You need a vision, or purpose, or calling that requires everything you have. You need work that is worthy of the sacrifice addiction demands, because addiction is a form of devotion. It asks you to give up your health, your relationships, your future, everything, and you do it willingly because some part of you knows that devotion is what you were built for. The tragedy is that your devotion got attached to the wrong thing. Discovering what that right thing is cannot be prescribed. It is different for every person because it emerges from the unique configuration of wounds, gifts, and soul contracts that make you who you are. But there are clues in the addiction itself. What does it give you that nothing else does? Is it a sense of aliveness? Then your purpose likely involves risk or adventure or creation. Is it a sense of peace? Then your purpose likely involves healing or service or spiritual practice. Is it a sense of connection? Then your purpose likely involves community or art or teaching. The addiction is a map written in code, and learning to read it is the beginning of finding your way home. But here is the obstacle. Finding your purpose requires you to grieve the life you thought you would have. It requires you to let go of who you were told to be and step into who you actually are. It requires you to disappoint people, to break agreements, to walk away from paths that look successful but feel empty. This is terrifying because it means risking everything with no guarantee of success. The addiction, for all its destruction, is at least familiar. Purpose is unknown territory, and the unknown always feels more dangerous than the devil you know. Yet this is the only way through. Not around, not over, but through. You have to be willing to let the addiction burn away everything that is false, so that what is real can finally emerge. You have to trust that underneath the compulsion is a self that knows exactly what it needs, a self that has been waiting your entire life for you to finally listen. That self does not speak in words. It speaks in longings you have ignored, in dreams you dismissed as unrealistic, in the moments when you felt most alive and most terrified at the same time. It speaks through the addiction itself, through the very thing you hate most about yourself, because that is where you hid the parts of you that the world could not handle. Jung spent decades working with people who had tried everything to overcome their addictions and failed. He noticed something that went against all conventional treatment. The people who recovered were not the ones who fought hardest against their addiction. They were the ones who stopped fighting and instead turned toward it with curiosity and compassion. They asked, not how do I get rid of this, but what is this trying to teach me? This shift transformed the addiction from an enemy to be defeated into a guide pointing toward unfinished business in the soul. The conventional approach treats addiction as a problem to be solved through willpower or medication. But Jung understood that problems of the soul cannot be solved. They can only be outgrown. You do not overcome the addiction by becoming stronger than it. You outgrow it by becoming more whole than it. This means expanding your sense of self to include all the parts you rejected, integrating the shadow instead of destroying it, and discovering that the addiction was never the real issue. It was a symptom of a life unlived, a self unexpressed, a soul that could not breathe. He called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. And addiction, for all its destruction is often the crack that allows the real self to finally break through. This is why hitting rock bottom can be the beginning of transformation. The false self, built on image and control, has to fall apart so the authentic self can emerge. Jung called this death and rebirth. The person you thought you were has to die so the person you actually are can be born. This feels like dying because something in you is dying. The old structures, the old beliefs, all of it has to fall apart. The terror of this is why so many people relapse right when they are on the edge of breakthrough. But if you stay in the fire, you discover that liberation is not about returning to who you were before. It is about becoming someone you have never been, someone who has integrated both light and darkness, strength and vulnerability. This integrated self does not need addiction because it has found other ways to meet those needs. The final truth is this: you are not your addiction. Your addiction is a messenger, a teacher, a doorway, but it is not your identity. Underneath the compulsion is a self that has been waiting your entire life to be lived. That self is not perfect. It is not without wounds or struggles, but it is real, it is yours, and it is worthy of the devotion you once gave to the thing that was killing you. The only question is whether you are ready to meet it. If this video resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. Take care and see you later.